Welcome back, AP. That's right. 1 day. Trying to kind of like just push it along a little bit. Give you all a chance to kind of make sure that you know that the flips are up and then you can kind of move through them at your own pace. But where we left off last talking about with this last flip, we talked about, in the last flip, we talked about how the guiding commonality between the early and the high Middle Ages, of course, was lack of massive movement of money, and how the late Middle Ages is going to see a resurgence of that money. We also talked heavily about how the Eastern empires were actually very, very heavily progressive in the movement of trade goods, and they were actually having a golden age during the European quote-unquote dark ages, right? We talked about how those movements, those items are going to begin to kind of come back to Europe in the late Middle Ages. We talked about the growth of guilds, merchant guilds, craft guilds. We talked about what guilds are, right? We talked about then majorly talked about the goods that they were moving. We talked about merchant guilds particularly, and we talked about the tragedy of the late Middle Ages, right? Of course, the Crusades, Babylonian captivity, or i.e. the Great Western Schism, the Black Death, Plague, famines from 1315 to 1317, climatological shifts, the mini ice age of the Middle Ages. And then we got into how something insane happened, that the economics of the Middle Ages actually leapt forward when you would believe that they would be heavily stifled by the tragedy of the late Middle Ages. But again, let's go ahead and keep getting into it, right? We were talking about a little bit of how we're going to be making more money, right? So the resurgence of economies in Europe during the late Middle Age period going into the Renaissance is mainly due to the fact that you now have new trade routes popping up, right? Due to the collapse of societal constructs in the late Middle Ages and the ideas of the manorial system kind of going kaput, and then also not to mention the fact that the papacy also kind of lost a lot of money in organization. These people were now more dependent than ever on these trade items, right? So you're going to have new trade routes. New ships are going to be making their debut as well. Multi-level trade systems are going to also be popping up. This is crazy. You're going to see these new items like sedentary merchants and resident agents, right? Maybe let's say hypothetically that, like, Daphne used to own a merchant guild herself, right? The merchant guild of Daphne. And she is going to go out and buy a couple of new ships, and she wants to set up a multi-level trade system. So Daphne doesn't want to be on every single boat as these merchant guilds are beginning to expand. Instead, she decides to create herself into what's known as a sedentary merchant, a merchant who doesn't move, right? A merchant who sends people out using her resident agents, right? She has resident agents in Norway. She's got resident agents in England. She's got resident agents in France, and she's going to begin to move items to them, where they will then distribute her goods from her boats throughout their territories or their kingdoms, right? So Daphne is becoming a guild, wealthy guild owner, a very wealthy guild owner, right? And then also, they're going to begin to use this thing called the Commenda system. Genius, Daphne is, right? Daphne then is going to go on and start using the thing called the Commenda system, which she's actually going to use middlemen to pilot those boats from one location to the other, seeing a small percentage of the profit, right? So these merchant guilds are growing. The guilds exploded after the late Middle Ages, the tragedy of the late Middle Ages, right? You're also going to then see the rise of family firms. We'll talk about those a little bit more in specificity later, okay? Particularly, though, we'll talk about the Medici and the Sforza family, right? So the Medici coming from Florence and the Sforza coming from Milan. So you're also, like we talked about it a little bit earlier, you got warehouse inventory returning in full steam. You got non-perishable goods because remember, even though the tragedy of the late Middle Ages led to war and famine and also disease, pandemic scale like the world has not seen since, please no, you've got non-perishable goods. So even while these tragic events were happening, you still had goods that weren't expiring, right? So money is again beginning to recirculate. You also have the rise of new financial techniques, right? You got double entry bookkeeping. The Arab communities, particularly under the growth of the Islamic Golden Age, following 700 to about 1300 AD, are going to see that number that they help create. That zero is very important. Double entry bookkeeping is also referred to as what he owes, what he trusts, right? He owes and trusts its credits and debits. Double entry bookkeeping brought along the lines of credit lines. loans, right? How much a person owes you based on how much they have received, right? Credit and loans are going to be coming out of this double-entry bookkeeping. Bills of exchange showing proof of purchase. Money lenders with interest, the rise of financial institutions. Banks. Banks are going to be literally the things that bankroll the Renaissance as time goes forward. But we'll get there in a little bit. Now, this is the Europe we're dealing with. This is the Europe of about 1450. This is the Europe of the Renaissance period, right? Going into the Renaissance period. So we're seeing the end of the Middle Ages, and we are about to have the Renaissance born out of this map right here. Looks good, doesn't it? All right, so now again, we talked about already that is going to be the place where the Renaissance is born, the Kingdom of Italy. Right? So you saw the rise of these northern Italian states, okay? So where they're going to start out at is really, really interesting. So since no one is laying claim to them, since no one is actually saying that they technically do or don't own or stake claim to places like the area of Tuscany, which is home to Florence, or Milan, which is up in the northern of Europe, or to Venetia itself, they're going to begin to grow into these amazing little things called communes, all right? So the very first governments that were established in the northern states following these Ghibellines wars and this power vacuum were these ideas called communes. Now, communes were built as a safe haven for guilds. The guilds believed they found their refuge. They were going to begin to create these things known as communes. Sworn associations of free men, right? Free men who wanted freedom from nobility, no feudalism. They wanted to actually create states that existed to produce goods, make money, and have established economies. They wanted freedom from nobles. They wanted to regulate trade. They wanted to collect taxes, and they wanted to maintain city walls. They grew very, very wealthy, very, very quickly. But unfortunately, they were very politically unstable. The communes of the late Middle Ages in the Renaissance, or going into the Renaissance period, were politically unstable due to wars between different factions. All right, and this is what this is a picture that I like to use. This city right here is a city I've been to in Italy. It's known as San Gimignano. All right, San Gimignano. There's a whole entire story of why it's called that. It means Saint Gimignano. All right, San Gimignano would create different. What's the best way to put this? Okay, so San Gimignano. It's in the hills of Tuscany. It's very, very beautiful. Absolutely sweeping, gorgeous views all around it. But the thing that sticks out to you the most, and this is the reason why the communes were so unstable, are these goofy little towers everywhere. See how gorgeous this little city, this medieval city is on its own? Well, these little towers that were just like, pew, 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 and got stuck up everywhere, every time a wealthy family, usually connected to one of the guilds, would move into San Gimignano, they would build a tower. And every time another family moved in, they wanted to build another tower bigger than the last tower that had been built. And so you ended up with a city that had these little spires all over the place because of these wealthy families. This is power struggle, right? This is struggle for control over cities. This is a struggle to be the biggest money maker in the area, because the fact that you might be sworn associations of free men and creating these communes, it's all fine and good, but people are going to compete economically, right? And they're going to begin to divide themselves. And what they divided themselves into were these people known as the merchant elite and the popolo. The merchant elite were the ones that believed that they decided who was a citizen of a state based on their wealth, right? So these nobles that are warring within themselves in a sense and actually fighting amongst each other are also the ones deciding that, oh, well, they don't have enough money to actually be merchant elite. They're going to be these things called popolo grassa, which is like large people. Now, some were wealthy merchants, the popolo grosso, that represented the common people. Now, popolo, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Popolo are the various groups of the common, regular people, right? So you had the merchant elite up at the top, the ones building all these towers, except for maybe this little guy back here, who might have been a popolo grossa, right? So, or popolo grosso. So popolo are the regular commoners. Some of them were wealthy, but they weren't wealthy enough to be merchant elite. Now, the popolo represents the commoners, okay? They are popolo grosso, which means bigger person, or popolo minuto, which means commoners that were disenfranchised and very heavily taxed, okay? So the popolo were the ones subjected to heavy taxation by the merchant elite and the decision of citizenship rights by the merchant elite. this led to violent revolts, all right? Very, very big revolts, huge Popolo uprisings in these new, like, northern Italian states. And, oh, sorry, I'll get a little bit closer. You can pause it really quick right here if you can copy this down if you need. But I'm going to keep moving. So the goals, though, of these uprisings is to establish these things known as republics, okay? They wanted to establish a republic. Now, where did they get the idea of a republic from? From ancient Rome. Republic is rule through the hands of the people, technically, right? They wanted governments where power rested in the hands of its people, technically, with voting rights, the right to banish families or individuals that are going against the republic values of certain areas. And so they did technically create republics out of this. So these communes turned into republics. You had the Republic of Milan, you had the Republic of Venice, and you had the Republic of Florence, right? And that is what left them room to grow so large so quickly, right? So merchant elites began to do this really messed up thing, hiring mercenary armies to try and take down revolts. What a mercenary is, it's a paid army, right? These merchant elites didn't have armies at their disposal or large groups at their immediate disposal, so they had to pay for them, right? Well, some of the Swiss mercenaries are considered some of the best. The very, very high-priced ones that are going to come up frequently throughout the entire course. They're also still used at the Vatican to actually guard the Pope. Now, they're going to hire mercenary armies to take down these revolts, and the governments are going to slowly, underneath this republic, develop into these things called signories or signorias, right? Signori or signorias is lordly power, right? Usually actually kind of manipulated through a central strong male figure. Now, the reason why I'm getting at this is because that's the fake republic, okay? That's why I kept saying technically. Did the Republic of Florence technically operate as a republic? They did, all right? Their signoria was actually established by the 7 major guilds and 2 minor guild members of the territory within the Republic of Florence. So the 7 major guilds, including the Financial Guild, the Wool Merchants Guild, which is a very big one we'll talk about later, what's the other ones? The Metallurgy Guild, the Money Movers Guild. Those are 4 of the major 7. They had representatives in this thing known as a signoria. And so the signoria was 7, or would be 9 representatives of all those guilds. 7 of the major, 2 of the minor, that would decide taxation, management of city fortresses and walls, and things like that throughout the city. However, it's very easy to take over a system of 9 people, right? So it led to the uprisings of these strong male figures, leading to what's more commonly known as a signory, right? Which is actually lead by one man, and why I say is semi-dynastic, right? So enter the major families, right? They took over these signorias, right? And they ruled, like, not officially ruling over these cities, but they pretty much did, all right? So the families including the Sforza in Milan. Originally, it was the Visconti family. The Visconti family is known by this goofy seal right there, and this is the Sforza crest. But the Sforza crest married into the Visconti family. When the Visconti family died without any sons to heir the throne or heir the signori position, Francesco the I of Milan is going to actually be the one that takes over. We'll talk about that guy in here in a second. And then get the big one, the Medici of Florence, right? The Medici. Whoa, the biggin, all right? The Medici are the biggest, ruling family throughout most of European history that's going to come up frequently. Them and the Habsburgs. So this right here, that is the Medici crest. The late Medici crest, okay? So it's actually supposed to not have this blue one. It's supposed to be all red spheres on the Medici crest, but this is after they married into the French crown. So they actually adopted the fleur-de-lis as a part of their symbol when they actually married off one of their daughters into the French crown, Catherine de' Medici. Now, anyway, and that is the Visconti crest after the Sforza union, so the Sforza family. So we're going to talk first about this city, Milan, right? Why is Milan going to be a Renaissance hub? Why is Milan going to be a city under the Renaissance? Due to a lot of different factors, mainly due to their geography, because they are the midway point between the HRE and, not Rome, but they are the midway point between HRE and of the trade routes that are actually going through on their way to the HRE. If you wanted to get to the Holy Roman Empire and you wanted to bring your goods through, you had to pass through Milan. This is going to lead to their economics being based mainly off trade goods, agriculture, manufacturing. Their government is going to be based off the signori of the Visconti family and the Sforza family, led originally by this guy, Francesco I, Sforza. He is a mercenary ruler. He actually would hire large groups of military from all over Europe, and he would use them to keep power through Milan. Now, it's also, though, going to be later on, the Sforzas anyway, going to be conquered by Philip II of Spain, who's crazy important later on. But Milan is going to fall into the hands of the Sforza family. Under Sforza and the Sforza family, you're going to see some of the best works of art that the world had ever seen created during the Renaissance period, particularly The Last Supper. The Last Supper was actually financed by the Sforza family. Now, going forward, that right there is Francesco I, Sforza. And he's very important, but he's nowhere near important as these guys. I'm getting ahead of myself. Got Venice first. All right, so now you got the other big dog in the water is Venice, okay? Venice is the trade empire of Italy. Now, Venice is not this fake republic shenanigans, all right? So the fake republics that evolved into these signories were in Milan and Florence. Venice actually was able to stay immune to that because of the trade empire, being the trade empire of Italy, and yes, I mean that they are an empire. Everything in red was owned by Venice, so they actually were probably the strongest group all the way up until the death toll for Venice being an empire was Napoleon, and his conquest of Europe didn't even begin until 1804. So how wild is that? So Venice was the trade empire of Italy. They dominated trade in the Mediterranean, and as the merchant guild capital, they were the ones that were able to slowly conduct trade works, negotiations, and be the exclusive trade partner of the Byzantine and later the Ottomans. All right, so let's jump back to this map real quick. So that city right there is extremely important. That is Constantinople. Now, in 1453, Constantinople is going to fall to the Ottoman Turks, right? When the Ottoman Turks take over Constantinople, much, much later, they rename it Istanbul, right? So remember the song I put on the other one? Istanbul, it's Constantinople now, right? So Constantinople would fall, and the Byzantine was always the trade market with Venice, because the Venetians could easily sail down the Adriatic Sea through the Mediterranean, pick up goods in Constantinople, and then come right back and distribute these goods throughout Europe. When the Ottoman Turks took over Constantinople, Venice just thought smart, pivoted, made trade agreements with the Turks, right? Because everybody wanted to make money. So this manipulation of those trade markets is going to lead Venice to being autonomous. They're going to remain separate from the HRE, and they're going to be pretty much economically untouchable. Because if you touched Venice, you would bring the wrath of the Ottoman Empire down upon you, which nobody wanted to do that. So they are going to stay a legit signoria with representatives of the major guilds that sit in their city council and make decisions in a fair republic-style way all the way up until 1810 AD, which is absolutely wild. So from 400 AD all the way to 1810 AD, Venice stayed completely autonomous as a kingdom and a republic in and of itself. And they are the shining example of the Renaissance economy. Look at the city that was constructed on the water to move goods as the Renaissance economy. And they are a major figure in the late Renaissance period, but we'll talk about mannerism like way down the road, way down the road. Now, a lot of historians actually like bring up the case of, well, Venice didn't have as much art come out of it because they were so focused on their economics, which is true, but not everybody can be Florence. Florence is the cradle of the Renaissance. Florence, in the region of Tuscany in northern Italy, which is located north of Rome, south of Milan, and west of Venice. Florence is known as the cradle of the Renaissance, patroned mostly by the Medici and some of the most wealthy guilds that Europe has ever seen. Florence was the Renaissance Mecca land, the Renaissance place, due to the fact that their massive movement of money coming in. Florence saw the wool merchant guild come into their possession. They saw the first international bank come to their possession. And then they also saw this other crazy thing that has to do with textile dyeing. They actually discovered this product inside in mines in Florence called alum, A-L-U-M. It allows you to dye things blue and shades of blue. So Florence saw the birth of an economy that no one had ever seen, and it was mostly all done under this one family, the Medici family. Due to the fact that you've got money coming back to Europe, you've got money coming back into Venice, you've got money coming back into Milan, you've got money coming back into the papacy through the tithe and things like that, which we'll talk about that stuff later on. With all this money now beginning to recirculate its way around Europe, you need somewhere to put it. That is going to lead to the establishment of the Medici Bank. The Medici family creates the Medici Bank under Cosimo the Elder, and then his later descendant, his grandson, Lorenzo, also known as Il Magnifico, are going to be the wealthiest individuals in Europe. With wealth comes the Renaissance. With wealth comes the art of the Renaissance. That's why Florence was the cradle of the Renaissance, because they were the most wildly wealthy area in Italy at the time, due to, again, the banking system. Because remember, yes, Venice was the example of the Renaissance economy, but they had to put their money somewhere. And so they began to put it in the bank of the Medicis, right? And what does a bank do with your money once it goes there? Oh, they spend it, all right? Just to give you a heads up, let's do a little example real fast. This is why banking is so genius. Let's say, hypothetically, that Gia wants to open a bank. She's going to open the Heart to get. I don't know how to spell say your last name, so we're just going to say the Bank of Heart, right? So she opens the Bank of Heart, and she's like, "Oh, come to my bank, Cassidy and Grace and Kimberly and Lauren. Y'all come and store your money with me, right? In this big safe building that looks like this, that's got guards and big heavy doors, and your money will remain safe, and I will keep it safe for you for as long as forever, right?" And people are like, "Oh man, that's really comforting." Because, Cassidy and Grace, they're both from Venice, and they have a lot of money on hand, and they want to make sure it's put somewhere safe. And then Kimberly and Lauren are also from Milan, and they were like, "Oh, well, we have all this trade hub money. We need to put it somewhere safe." So you would put it inside of the Medici Bank. The Medicis would then go and spend it, all right? So the Medicis would spend this money because they're working on the hope that all four of you are not going to come take all of your money out at once. And it made them so wealthy that the florin the florin coined in Florence, it was their currency, became the universal currency of all of Europe, right? That's how wealthy they were. Florence, to this day, is beautiful because of the powerful banks that were there, the money that was to be spent there, and the huge strides in art and intelligence that would follow, mainly due to patronage, which we'll talk about again a little bit further. But this is what Florence looks like today. My wife and I took that picture standing on the square of Michelangelo that is up on the west bank of the Arno River. This is the Arno River right here. Florence looks like it is just stood still in time. That is us standing outside of the Duomo, which is also known as the Santa Maria del Fiore. Basically, it's the Mother Mary of Flowers church in Florence. That is the dome, Brunelleschi's dome, which I know one of you is working on and actually doing your research on right there. That is the baptismal right there. The baptismal doors on the other side are by Lorenzo Ghiberti. Very, very beautiful area. This right here is the inside of the Palazzo del Vecchio, inside of this square. That right there is the Medici family home. That is actually where the Medicis themselves lived, inside of the Palazzo Signori. And that right there is an example of the art that would come flooding into Florence and the intelligence that would come roaring back. And the reason why I like to leave off here is because let's take 2 seconds and understand this. This money has now come flying back into Europe. The big areas that are in particularly good examples of this money coming back are Milan, Venice, and Florence. And look at this piece of art. What's it look like? Who is that? With all this money coming back, what do you think they would begin to become obsessed with? The era of antiquity. This art is not based off the Middle Ages. This art wanted to separate itself from the Middle Ages. That's Perseus holding the head of Medusa. This piece is by, what is his name? Cellini. All right, so Cellini's Perseus holding the head of Medusa is in the personal sculpture garden of the Medici family, which sits right next door to their homestead in the Palazzo del Vecchio in Florence. Cellini cast this bronze piece, and it is still outside in their sculpture garden, and it is absolutely beautiful. And I actually took this picture. So Cellini is an example of Renaissance artists and the rebirthed obsession with Roman and Greek ideas, right? That is what's being reborn. The ideas of the era of antiquity, the ideas and the intelligence of the Greek and Roman world are going to come rushing back with the economic progression of northern Italy and their powerful city-states that started out as communes and popolo revolts and all this real kind of unstable political ideas, but it led to governments led in Milan and Florence by individuals like signories, but in the Republic of Venice, not so much. And it led to this massive rebirth. So that's why it's called the rebirth. That's why it's the Renaissance. And the Renaissance period is going to kind of start really beginning here. And in the next flip, we'll be talking about what's going on in Northern Europe, why Rome isn't on this list, and then we'll start talking about humanism and how that is the guiding light of the Renaissance period. So, appreciate y'all coming around. See y'all later.